You may have excellent corporate governance systems in place, and yet those systems fail. This is the story of the National Social Security Fund of Uganda and the budgetary allocation of 1.8 billion shillings for corporate social investment. A parliamentary probe found its allocation to have been an abuse of power and an abuse of the fund's budgeting process. Hello, my name is Jimmy Walabichi, and you're welcome to Corporate Governance Africa, where we seek to promote good corporate governance through film. In this video, we draw some lessons from the findings of a parliamentary probe of NSSF's corporate governance structures. We specifically focus on the findings related to a budgetary allocation of 1.8 billion Uganda shillings, a sum that was designated as corporate social investment in the 2022-2023 NSSF budget. The parliamentary probe found that this allocation was a manifestation of corporate governance failure. Corporate governance is the system by which companies are directed and controlled. In this discussion, we shall explore three main areas which are key in a corporate governance system: the board of directors and the company secretary. And third, we shall consider the values of the organization. And all these will be related to the National Social Security Fund. But first, we'll give a brief overview of the National Social Security Fund. The National Social Security Fund is a national savings scheme mandated by the Government of Uganda through the National Social Security Fund Act. It's aimed at providing social security services to employees in Uganda. The NSSF is a provident fund that covers all employees in the private sector, including non-government organizations that are not covered by the government pension scheme. It is governed by a stakeholder board of directors appointed by the Minister of Gender, Labour and Social Development, and is comprised of 9 members. And these include a chairperson, the permanent secretary of the ministry responsible for labour, the permanent secretary of the ministry responsible for finance, 4 representatives of employees nominated by the Federations of Labour Unions, 2 representatives of employers nominated by the Federation of Uganda Employers, and the managing director, who is an ex-officio member without a right to vote. The Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development supervises the fund on matters relating to social security, and the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development supervises on matters of finance and investments relating to the fund. As of the 30th of June 2022, the fund's assets under management stood at Uganda shillings 17.2 trillion. But why did the Parliament of Uganda probe the fund? On the 19th of January 2023, the Honourable Minister of Gender and Social Development presented a report to the Parliament concerning the state of affairs at the National Social Security Fund. The report raised a number of issues regarding the corporate governance of the NSSF, which resulted in the Minister delaying the recommended appointment of the Managing Director of the fund. After that, the Parliament debated the report, and following that debate on the 25th of January 2023, the Speaker of Parliament constituted a select committee to investigate the state of affairs of the National Social Security Fund. The Corporate Social Investment Scheme was a scheme that comprised donations that would be distributed to a number of beneficiaries. Accordingly, 800 million of the 1.8 billion was to be issued to the labour organizations of COFTU and NOTU. COFTU is the central organization of free trade unions and NOTU is the national organization of trade unions. Each was to receive 400 million over the financial year of 2022-2023, receiving 100 million for each quarter. The 1 billion was distributed as follows: 250 million was to the minister responsible for labour, 250 million was to the board chair, 500 million was to the rest of the board members. The purpose of this money was for the recipients to donate it to different stakeholders for the furtherance of the interests of the National Social Security Fund. Hence, it was called Corporate Social Investment. The former managing director testified that the corporate social investment originated from the board. And this is what he had to say in this respect.
Mr. Chair, for the 11th time, I would like to say that CSI rather than CSR was a new innovation that the fund board had come up with. So the board of directors asked us to include a budget to be able to enable the fund be relevant to its community. That's where the CSR budget arose. That information was obtained and given to the finance department, who then allocated it.
The chief financial officer added his voice to this.
Now, it has to break down, sir, the 1.8 billion. The 800 million were informed, that is unions generally. The 1 billion we are informed it is pressure from above.
We move on now to a discussion of the Board of Directors. In its principles of corporate governance, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development has stated that together with guiding corporate strategy, the board is chiefly responsible for monitoring managerial performance and achieving an adequate return for shareholders, in this case the savers, while preventing conflicts of interest and balancing competing demands on the corporation. There are at least 4 lessons that we can learn from the board of NSSF in this matter. First, if it is indeed true that the board of directors exerted pressure on the former managing director to make provision for corporate social investment, this would be a breach of their fiduciary duty to act in good faith in the interests of NSSF. The former managing director testified that indeed the board compelled him to make a corporate social investment, as we've already seen. To act in good faith in the company's interests, directors must act in good faith in what they consider to be the best interests of the company. They should not have a personal motive in making particular decisions. And to exert pressure would show that they indeed had a personal interest in the matters. And this would not be proper for a director. Their personal interest would arise from them having access to a large sum of money which they could spend as donations and potentially without accountability. Also, it would potentially be a breach of the duty not to make a secret profit. This fiduciary duty is so strict that if a director makes a personal profit arising out of their relationship with the company is entitled to that money as its own, even if the director was acting honestly and in the company's best interests. It's important to note that the board denied that they ever put pressure on the management.
For me, when we were having a meeting in Ibulala in Mbarara, there is a hotel there called Ibulala. I was with Dr. Silva Mujishai discussing other things. Then Vyarugaba himself came with a phone and opened and scored it that in the budget we shall have this one for you. Now I said, what is this? And on that day, he wanted to renew his contract. Now I told him that I don't need the money from you. We were 3. I was with Silva, then Vyarugaba came. And I said, if it is a question of renewing your contract, me, I'm going to vote for you.
The board members, however, still approved the budget with this amount, but, and this is important, they required that before any money could be spent concerning the corporate social investment money, it had to be accompanied by work plans from the management and accountability matrices for the same. However, 200 million shillings of the 1.8 billion was released to COF2 and NOTO without a single work plan or accountability matrix being presented by management to the board. Against this background, there were still challenges with the board concerning the 1.8 billion shillings, which leads us to the second point. In this regard, a section of the board, namely those who were nominated by COF2 and NOTO, they knew that the management had released part of the 1.8 billion contrary to the board's resolution, but they did and they said nothing. And this violated their duty to stand by the decisions of the board, whether or not they disagreed with them. A board decision, even when not unanimous, is still a decision of the whole board, and a director has a duty to stand by it once it is taken. By remaining silent, they did not fulfill their duty to the board and may have undermined the board's effectiveness. Indeed, If they believed very strongly about the decision, they could have had other options like maybe resigning. Perhaps the directors took the decision that they did because of potential conflicts of interest that they had with NSSF, which leads us to the third point. Some board members may have placed themselves in situations in which their personal interests conflicted with those of the NSSF. As an example, the director representing NOTU advocated for NOTU to receive part of the corporate social investment money when the matter was discussed by the relevant board committee.
I want to appreciate that you're sharing with the committee good information. However, I want to draw you back to the other 400 million that you said you as NOTU were lobbying for.
Yes, not as such, but as workers' representatives. When we came to the fund, we found so many innovations and opportunities where the members were not benefiting. And one of them was the financial literacy. Then there was He Innovator, then there's the Yield Fund, then there's so we thought that maybe we could make a part of our constituents. After they are also contributing members of NSSF. That maybe they could also benefit from that. But it is the directors who thought that this one could be an additional value of our being on the board.
Do you realize conflict of interest? Yet you're the one supposed to approve a budget. Now you're initiating the budget yourself.
Conflict of interest in what context, Honorable? I don't understand. Like if I'm a director, I'm at a committee level, and they bring issue the financial literacy program, then I say, when we're identifying the stakeholders, and we say, why can't we include unions as stakeholders in that?
You see why I'm bringing out that? Why I'm bringing out that is that who is supposed to generate the budget?
The technical staff.
But now you're the one generating
No,
that.
I'm not generating.
You're suggesting...
I make an input.
Oh, you made an input.
Yes.
Okay.
Did the personal allegiance of the board members to the stakeholders whom they represented set them on a collision course with the interests of the National Social Security Fund? Could this have influenced the board members to turn a blind eye to the release of the 200 million shillings despite the board's resolution to the contrary? Perhaps it did. In any event, in corporate governance, directors must not let their personal interests conflict with their duty to the company. Finally, the board may not have exercised sufficient diligence in the budgetary approval process. One of the board members testified that the board of NSSF generally did not have adequate time in the budget approval process.
On my side, Chair, Mr. Hassan, now this is only you. Forget about other board members, because this can save you alone or it can take all of you. Tell us the truth. How is the process of budgeting and budget approval? Do you look at details? Do they just bring you block figures? Do they bring things in a hurry and you just approve? What exactly happens during that process?
But I think what is happening in the NSSF is what is happening in other public bodies. Yeah, where you find that sometimes things are not given due time. Like now, the board under the law is supposed to meet once in 3 months. And the issues you are covering, you cannot cover them in a single meeting. Yeah, they may require even more time, but you may end up being obliged to handle that thing within that short time you have. Yeah, so I cannot even blame anybody, but it is the law sometimes.
So you are bombarded with so many things?
Yeah, within a time. Like
within a short time?
You are supposed to have a quarterly meeting. One meeting, committee, then the board.
I thought a board meeting like this one of approval of the budget is not a one-day event. It's like 2-3 days. You go somewhere in Mbale or Mbarara and you are there for 2, 3, 4 days and you do so many things.
Yeah, even then, but if you look at the budget of NSSF, if it could be done the way Parliament does, it could be fair. But as of now, you find that you are given very little time to handle the magnitude of things. So you may end up rushing and even failing to take due attention to certain things.
So you think it is intentional to give you little time so that so many things go without your notice?
I can't say that it is intentional, because the blame may end up even with the framers of the law.
Thank you, Chair.
It's not very clear if this is exactly what happened with respect to the 1.8 billion shillings, but it's something that cannot be ignored and something that the board should actually be careful about in the future. The director has a duty of care, and this duty has to do with the degree of care, diligence and skill that a company director is required to exercise in order not to be considered to have undertaken their legitimate duties negligently. In sum, the directors ought to always be mindful of their duty of care and skill and their fiduciary duties, and always be mindful of their duty to provide strategic direction to the company. A discussion of the key role players in a corporate governance system would be incomplete without a discussion of the role of the company secretary of the NSSF. The reason is that the company secretary is a highly ranked professional trained to uphold the highest standards of corporate governance, effective operations, compliance, and administration. The parliamentary committee asked the company secretary about the management's actions in signing an MOU with COFTU. They also asked the company secretary about the release of the 200 million for NOTU and COFTU and her role, if any, in the management's actions. Listen to this very instructive interaction.
I'm sorry I keep interrupting, because we are now really getting puzzled. Who is telling lies? Now you have thrown the management in the bus. The corporation secretary, I'm sure every memorandum, contract, agreement that is signed at NSSF, you are involved. Now the board is saying they do not know and they refused an expenditure of this money. But you and Ayota, Mr. Ayota, signed an MOU with COFTU and gave them even part of the money that was meant to be given as per that memorandum. So are you going behind the board to now start even going into contracts to give this money out? Because they are saying for them they stopped the expenditure. Now they are saying they are surprised if this money has been spent. But already there are steps being taken to spend the money, signing an MOU, sending the money to personal accounts.
Chair, just spent. A member from COFTU has confirmed. A member from NOTU has confirmed. Each one of them received 100 million, and they have already spent the money against the guidance of the board that there must be clear guidelines on how this should be done. I just wanted...
Thank you, Chair. First, a comment which I'd wanted to raise earlier for the record. I am the custodian of the official records of the fund, official. And I put up my hand at the point at which Director Hassan mentioned to the committee of a meeting involving not a meeting, a discussion among 3 board members. It's important that the committee notes the official position, how boards make decisions by board resolution in a meeting. There's an agreed agenda, there are papers presented, resolutions are passed. I have those records, I have shared them. And to note that the discussion that Director Hassan mentioned was outside the boardroom. No wonder even I got to know about the breakdown yesterday. So Chair and members, I think it's important that when the questions are being posed, to put that into perspective. Was it an official board position, or was it based on discussions and understandings outside the boardroom? And that leads me to the questions you've just asked right now. The conclusion of that memorandum of understanding is an operational arrangement. The board's role was to pass a policy, the stakeholder management policy, which they did. The implementation is management. Now, that memorandum of understanding did not mention amounts. In fact, it mentioned that the budgets would be predetermined and pre-agreed. There is a clear board resolution, the official board position, that instructed management to come up with work plans and initiatives. That was repeated, the extract we've shared, repeatedly up to even the meeting of 25th November. In that respect, there was no budget. How was money released? I don't know. How the money was released would have to be answered by whoever released the money. But the official record is clear. Management is expected to avail the initiative. So I submit.
From this interaction, if it is indeed true that the CS did not know that the management had released these funds without following the board's resolution, it means that there are circumstances where a CS may be unaware of key breaches of corporate governance within the organization. The question would therefore be, how do you mitigate this risk? Perhaps periodic reviews of the organization's corporate governance through corporate governance audits could help. Second, as a way of keeping informed of what is happening in the organization, the CS may endeavor to cultivate relationships with key people in the management of the organization, like the Chief Financial Officer. This would help alert the CS of important developments or events in the management of the company before they happen. Third, is that when some breaches do occur, the CS ought to be quick to admit that there have been shortcomings in the system and to take measures to reduce the risk of similar events happening. The CS's closing remarks pointed to this fact.
Thank you, Chair and members. Mine is an appeal. I think through these proceedings, what has come out clearly is that everyone is interested in the member and safeguarding the members' savings. And that's the mandate the fund is tasked with. We have learnt a lot. There are lessons that have been learnt. We have learnt clearly, without even waiting for your findings, there are issues that we've identified where clearly we've got to go back to the drawing board and change course,
From the CS's remarks, it's clear that the CS acknowledged that there were weaknesses in the corporate governance system. We move on now to the values of the NSSF. The values of NSSF include integrity, among others. Whether or not the board put pressure on the managing director to introduce the corporate social investment scheme, there are questions concerning whether the board handled this matter with integrity. I am not saying that they didn't handle the matter with integrity, but there are questions that could be raised as to that fact or that question. The reason is that if they indeed put pressure on the management, as has been discussed, this would be a breach of their fiduciary duties. On the other hand, if they did not, the question arises, why would they recommend that the managing director be given a new contract of service with NSSF with the knowledge that they already had about the inducement to give them a new contract, which would actually be something that is unethical? It's important to note that the board is the custodian of the wider organization's culture. It is the board that decides what the organizational culture should be, and it's not the other way around. If a toxic organizational culture begins to seep into the board culture, then the organization as a whole is at greater risk because the board priorities and practices will flow into the organization via the top management team. In conclusion, from the above discussions, it is clear that there was a failure of the corporate governance systems. It's clear that a board ought to be deliberate about cultivating a good ethical culture in their organization. But also, more importantly, the board also ought to be careful and deliberate and intentional about building an ethical culture within the board itself. That's for every board to decide on their own.